Hi, welcome to Box on the Box, Rock and Celluloid, Botbrack for short. So I was reading an article the other day on Neil Peart, Rush's late drummer, and his car collection was coming up for auction, and I'd caught a sneak peek of this on a documentary about Rush, and I noticed that every car he had was silver, which I found a bit OCD, but obviously if you know about Neil Peart, I guess he was that kind of guy. But when I saw, I could pick out a few cars in the background, I thought, oh, he's got great taste here. And when I actually looked at the cars in the auction pictures, you had some beauties: Lamborghini Miura, Maserati Ghibli, Cobra, Shelby Cobra, I think a DB5 as well, classic James Bond. And it got me sort of thinking about cars, and like cars in films and TV when I was growing up in the 1970s and 80s. The cars were as much a part of the show and the films as the characters themselves. They kind of define the characters, and you don't get that now. You don't sort of get TV shows where the protagonist, antagonist, whatever, drives a sort of car that kind of says something about their character or lifestyle. And it got me thinking more. When I was a kid, luxury cars, you very rarely saw them. You would see a Ferrari once a year. Porsches you saw quite regularly. You saw Rolls Royces very rarely, Bentleys. Lamborghinis, you'd see them once every few years if you were lucky. And, even cars like BMWs and Mercedes were quite ostentatious, and you wouldn't see them that often. And I was driving tonight, and I passed two BMWs like that, and then I think I saw a Lambo just the other day, and I passed a Ferrari yesterday. Aston Martin went past me before, and every time that happens, I'm just sort of like, when I was a kid, these things were like things of exotic beauty and represented this super glamorous lifestyle. And when you saw them in films and TV, it kind of helped you enter that fantasy world more. So I thought I'd look at like cars, some of my favourite cars in TV and film, or where some of my favourite cars of all time have been used. So, start 1969, well, actually we should start 1968, thinking about it, because that's the earliest I'm going back. And of course 1968 is the year of Bullitt, and the Ford Mustang GT, one of the top American muscle cars. Not much you can say about this, but I mean, the Mustang that Steve McQueen drives in Bullitt is, I would say that film, that car chase, and that car's kind of 50% of what people remember about the film in a way. The car's like absolutely essential to the film, and the engine noise. Obviously, they probably haven't used the right engine noise. I'll imagine it's quite close. It's just it's equally a character in the film. So then I thought, 1969. So the Italian Job's obviously a massive car film. And there's some interesting cars in this film. When Michael Caine gets out of prison, he actually goes and picks up a convertible DB4 Aston Martin. I'm just looking in here, it was a 3.7 litre inline six apparently. That means the cylinders in one line and not a V. That's quite interesting, because obviously the Aston Martin, the DB5s are like the classic Aston Martin, and that's the James Bond car. But for a lot of people, the DB4 is a bit more aesthetically pleasing, has slightly different headlights, slightly different features around the body area, and so on. If you get up an image of it and A/B it, it's a kind of subtle difference. That I think the DB5 feels a bit larger, and when they went to the DB6, it was kind of bigger still. But that's pretty cool. There's a good kind of bit of class satire in that sequence where Caine kind of pretends to be posh and says he's been out shooting tigers, which kind of ties in with his Zulu character. Another car that briefly shows up is a Fiat Dino as well. These are quite rare cars. So this is a Fiat, but it had a Ferrari engine, I think, hence the Dino. I'm guessing it's Ferrari Dino engine, the same they had in that. And that briefly shows, and there's an E-Type, but obviously the classic car in this is in the opening sequence, and that's, not only is it one of the most famous sequences featuring a car in a film, but it's probably, for me, maybe the greatest car of all time. It's a Lamborghini Miura. I know Neil Peart had one of these in silver, of course. I'm not sure which model it is, because there was there's the first Miura, there was the S, and there was the SV, I think. But the Miura is the first supercar, so it's the first car where the engineering technology at the time and the speed that it could do, it set the template, and after that came the Ferrari Daytona, another car we're going to come to, and then you get your Lamborghini Countach and so on. Beautiful car. I was lucky enough to see one in the flesh once. I was on holiday in America. We were in San Diego. We went up to La Jolla, which is just outside San Diego. And there's some car dealerships there, classic cars. And I went in a garage and it was a treasure trove of cars. And there was a yellow Miura. And the Miura looks great in yellow, actually. Obviously, red's a classic look as well. But yeah, Italian Job, that's a great one for that. Another film from 1969, which is a little tiny and kind of loose bit of car porn here. So another car that Neil Peart had in his collection is the Maserati Ghibli. And this is actually my favourite car of all time. The Miura runs at close second, but I just always loved the look of the Ghibli. The Ghibli's kind of third in the pecking order behind the Miura and the Ferrari Daytona. They'll kind of duke it out. But I love the Ghibli. It's got a really long body. It's got a grand touring look, but it's just a beautiful car. So in the film Swimming Pool, which is directed by Jacques Deray, 1969, this was actually remade in 2003 with Charlotte Rampling and Ludivine Sagna, I think you pronounce it. She's in Lupin. But it's Alan Delon and Romy Schneider, who was his former girlfriend. I forget the name of the other actor, but basically they're a couple, and then the sort of rival husband turns up, but he's got a maroon Maserati Ghibli, and I think that's probably one of the first times it's from built 1967 to 73, the Ghibli. That's probably one of the first times it's shown up in a film. They did a Spider version of that as well, like the Ferrari Daytona. So these go for a big buck now, but not as much as a Miura or a Daytona. But the car that replaced the Ghibli is a Maserati Calm Sin. This is a lovely car as well. She's got angular back. I mean, maybe even like this more than the Ghibli these days. I don't know. But the only time I've seen that in a TV show was in an episode of Armchair Thriller. So Armchair Thriller is a 70s sort of portmanteau thriller series where you've got a different story each week. And the most famous one is the one about the Black Nun. I forget the title of it now. It's got Mariah Aiken in it as Jemima Shaw. Absolutely terrifying, the cliffhanger of the third episode, I think, when we were kids. But there's an episode later on, I'm just looking for the title of it. Apologies here. Yeah, it's Dying Day. What's interesting about it, it's got a Maserati Calm Sin in it. I can't remember if Ian McKellen drives it, but Ian McKellen appears in the episode and it's got a Calm Sin in it. Okay, so moving on, like Michael Caine connection, 1974, he stars in an obscure film called The Marseille Contract. It's got James Mason and Anthony Quinn in it. It's by a director called Robert Parrish, who's kind of a 70s hack, I suppose. Did a few films, but this is interesting because his car, this is an Alfa Romeo Montreal, and this was Alfa Romeo's car that was there to kind of compete with the Porsche E-Type Jag, stuff like that. It was pretty expensive, pretty rare now, but he actually drives one which is kind of a metallic brown, but it's a really cool 70s Tourer. They actually made it from 70 to 77. So that's like a really cool sort of, not as well known car, but a really nice two-seater sports car from its time. And around 75, another really cheesy film. And this makes good use of an E-Type Jag. So E-Type Jag, you see them all the time in films. I mean, E-Type Jags are ubiquitous. I love them. Quite hard to spot which is a Mark 1 or a Mark 2. This film uses a Mark 2. Which has slightly different headlights. There might be some other things, but that's the way they spot them, and the headlight in the front. It's 1966, apparently, with the reg on it, but it's the film Brannigan with John Wayne. It's actually a bit with this where he's driving a Mark 1 Capri thing and he tries and jumps Tower Bridge. I always love this film. It's his Dirty Harry film. It's crap, but it's one of those crap films that's brilliant. But the villain, who's a hitman and wears like mysterious shades, he tries to gun down Judy Deason, which he should never do. He drives a brown Mark II E-Type, but it's kind of used quite threateningly in the action sequence at the end. So that's another really good one way. You've got quite a common car, but used in a really effective way. But I think, obviously, the classic car person is the character of James Bond. And we've already mentioned the DB5 with Sean Connery. Obviously, Daniel Craig ended up using that in about a couple of films. There's various Aston Martins, newer models in the films. Then there was the Brosnan era where he used BMWs, which was very controversial. Although I actually thought it worked quite well in Tomorrow Never Dies. He had like a sort of executive BMW 7 Series, I think. And it quite kind of suited Brosnan's kind of look. You know, you imagine him sort of as a businessman. But a lot of people saw that as scandalous. Obviously, you got the Lazenby, which got the DBS. Which is actually my favourite Aston. I maybe actually prefer that to the DB5. I love the Lazenby one. But Roger Moore, in some ways, had kind of the pick of the bunch, really, I think, for my generation. Obviously, had the Mark 1 Lotus Esprit in the Spire 11, which was 1977. So this was the underwater car. And the Mark 1 Esprit is now the most sought after Esprit. Actually, there's about 5 versions of the Esprit, I think. And the Mark 1's got the cleanest lines, and aesthetically, it's kind of like quite pure, and it's aged really well. Obviously, it probably looked more dated when you had the big spoilers on. But yeah, really cool car, go for a lot of money now. And in For Your Eyes Only, I'm just checking, I had to write this down, you use the Mark II Essex Turbo spec. So the Mark II Esprit, which kind of had bigger spoilers and a bit kind of fatter looking. They did a kind of turbo version of that. And that's what he uses in For Your Eyes Only. But the Mark 1 Esprit will always be the classic that he uses in For Your Eyes Only. White with the red tartan seats. But it's interesting to think about Roger Moore, because I think more than any other actor, he's associated with the cars. So we've got those 2 James Bond cars there. And then in the original series of The Saint, he drove the Volvo P1800, which was quite a cool car to drive at the time. And then when he did the Persuaders, of course, he had the Aston Martin DBS. So his differed from the Lazenby model because it didn't have the wire wheels. It had what I call the classic Aston Martin wheels that they used right the way through the 70s after a time and in the early 80s. And this was actually a mustard yellow colour, quite a kind of very 70s colour, but this car actually sold at auction for 534 grand. I saw a feature on it a while ago. But what was great about that in the Persuaders, you had a yin and yang. You had Lord Breck Sinclair in the sort of classic British sports car of the time, and then Tony Curtis had the superb Ferrari Dino, one of my all-time favourite Ferraris. Can't remember, I think the Dino was first made 67, but it could be 69. But they go for a lot of money now. You always get them in the classic red, but I once saw a lovely metallic blue one with brown leather seats on the classic car show, where they're over at Monterey, where they have a classic car auction show and so on. So the Persuaders is great when you're a kid for cars. But Roger Moore's greatest car, I think, and the greatest use of a car in a Roger Moore film is in his classic The Man Who Haunted Himself. So this was like the 1970 film that Rog rated as his best performance. And his doppelganger, his dual Harold Pelham character, drives a Lamborghini Islero. So this is quite a rare Lamborghini. I'm just looking at notes here. They only made it from 1968 to 69. It was a really lovely, beautiful looking car. But the one that was actually used in The Man Who Haunted Himself, which is silver, but it kind of looks blue actually in the film. That sold for its guide price was 285k last year when it went to auction. But this car's used really effectively in the film because the original Harold Pelham drives like a stodgy Rover, which my dad used to call cabinet puddings. So this is, forget which model of the Rover it is, but the cabinet in the 1960s always used to use them. And he's a city guy with a bowler hat, and he suggests a sort of conservativeness, a stodginess. And the other Harold Pelham, the doppelganger who's given birth to in his near-death experience, he drives the Lamborghini Islero, and he's dynamic and makes love to his wife and stuff like that. So it's great that Sir Rog, he really did well with his cars. Obviously, I mentioned the Saint before, and I would be remiss to not mention Return of the Saint. And this was one of the first shows I saw where they used their Jag XJS. So in Ogilvy's time, Simon Templar, when they first brought the Jag XJS out, he used that. Although I do think Gareth Hunt's character, or Purdy, Johnny Lumley's character in the New Avengers, may have used the XJS. I think they came out in 76. When I was a kid, I actually used to have a really good brochure of the XJS. Pretty cool shots of it. It seems kind of Jag XJS, but at the time it was kind of the follow-up to the E-Type, and it was considered quite the thing. So that was really cool. Those are kind of the film ones that spring to mind. And then it's the same thing with TV, that the car was as much a part of the look and the character of the TV show as the characters in it. Obviously, the classic one, I think the groundbreaking one, is Starsky and Hutch, the Gran Torino. Principally because of the colours, the Ford Gran Torino with that red and white colour, which defined the two characters, and they always used that car. And then a few years later, you had General Lee in the Dukes of Hazzard, which is a 1969 Dodge Charger. I actually fought in the film Vanishing Point, I think that's 1971 with Barry Newman. I thought he drove a Dodge Charger, but I checked it's a Dodge Challenger. So maybe that followed up what came before the Charger. But the Dodge Charger is a classic American muscle car. So yeah, Starsky and Hutch generally, I think that kind of set the template for American shows having a car that defined a character. Magnum drove a Ferrari 308 GTB, which at the time was a kind of entry-level Ferrari. Over here, the professionals, Doyle drove an RS2000, Bodie had a Capri Mark II S Series, I think. So Ford Capri, actually an RS2000 have more stink than a Ford Capri, but cool looking cars. And then the Sweeney was quite interesting because Series 1 to 3 they had the original Mark I Ford Granada, and for the final fourth series they had a different credit sequence in the Mark II Granada. So that was cool. And actually just jumping back, obviously you've got to have the Avengers as well. Emma Peel has a Lotus Elan, and then when played by Diana Rigg, and then when Linda Forson took over for the final series as Tara King, she drove a Lotus Europa, a kind of big, kind of sleeker car, but kind of more masculine actually. Europa, I mean the Elan's a very feminine car, so quite interesting that she drove at Europa. And a kind of little weird quaint one is the TV show Bergerac, where the character of Jim Bergerac lives on Jersey and he drives a Triumph Roadster from 1947. So this car kind of predates the Triumph TR series that would mutate into TR1, TR2, TR3, 4, 5 and 6. So people watching, you were probably more likely to have seen a TR5, TR6. I think Angela Rippon had a TR6, quite a cool 70s car. Yeah, and then a final weird one, like sort of tying in with the Starsky and Hutch. There used to be a show called Hardcastle McCormick, and the character of McCormick, forget who he was played for, he drove this weird car. It was called a Manta Montage. I mean, it looked like some big supercar. It was actually a kit car. So a kit car is when you buy like all the fiberglass body and you get like what's the word? You get another car. In this case, it was usually a Volkswagen Beetle. And you use the chassis from that, and then you put in your running gear and so on. So they obviously overdubbed, top engine noise. I doubt it had a Volkswagen Beetle engine in. Maybe they'd souped up with something else, but it looks like a Lamborghini, but it's like a cheap way to get a fancy looking car. And you got various other ones in the 80s like Novas, and the early one Marcos was an early kit car as well. So yeah, that's my little run through some cool cars and stuff that are in films. If I had to pick a favourite one, it would be the Lamborghini Islero actually. Obviously the Miura, the Maserati Ghibli and so on. They'll always be my favourite cars, but the way that car's used in The Man Who Haunted Himself with a great Siraj at the wheel, I just think that car is a real part of the whole character of that film. There's other cars, so maybe in the comments or whatever, want to share us on Facebook, you can put in some other cool cars that you've seen in TV and films. I'll have missed loads out. Remember, share and subscribe. Please share, subscribe to the Botbrack channel if you want these kind of little vids, and hopefully see you soon. Cheers.